Frank, welcome to the ArcSpeak podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Well, it's great to be here.
And Frank, you're joining us from the beautiful city of Chicago, which Cormac and I got to visit a couple of years ago at the AIA conference. How's Chicago right now?
Chicago is unseasonably warm right now, so we're enjoying every minute of it because it's going to change, I'm sure, pretty quickly.
You're bracing yourselves, right, for what's coming.
You're like, wait, what time is it?
Well, before the show, Frank and I were talking about some cool places in Chicago, and I'm just going to mention them here because I didn't get to go to either one of these two places that he mentioned. One was the Rookery. Cormac, do you know about the Rookery?
I do. In fact, I had a friend of mine come in and I basically took him around the Midwest. But of course, one of my favorite cities, I apologize to my current city, Detroit, but is Chicago. And so I had to hit the highlights of all of those. And the Rookery, honestly, was stop number one, if you don't count the fact that we parked right next to the Monadnock building.
Which is another beautiful structure.
Is another amazing one.
And then Frank went to
two.
IIT, and so he had Crown Hall as another must-see if you're in the city or around the city. So.
Yes.
And he's in Oak Park. He's been in Oak Park, and he made some confessions. I won't repeat those confessions on the podcast, but of certain things that he hasn't visited yet. But you're in a rich place for architecture, so it's pretty cool to practice there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was telling Evan that right behind our office building is actually the Unity Temple. So you can walk out our back door, and for several years, or for almost 2 years, it was shrouded in scaffolding. When they renovated it, but it looks just beautiful now.
I think you pretty much described every Frank Lloyd Wright building, in the last 10 years right now.
Yes. Yeah, or them to come because Taliesin is hurting for some
leaking and settling and cracking.
Right.
When I was there, it was the first time I'd ever been there, was just over the summer, and it was rainy outside. And it was rainy inside. And I kept pointing over. I was like, "Is anybody going to grab a bucket for that over there?"
They're like, "No, we know what's going on. It's fine. It's been like that."
Yeah. And I know Frank was short and all, but like his bedroom, when I could stand upright and my head was into the ceiling, like, come on. But honestly, it was because of settling. So you're right.
Yeah.
Well, that is not what we're here to talk about today. So we're here to talk about outdoor spaces once again, and this time from a different angle. And the angle this time is really, and Frank was gracious enough to kind of provide this amazing resource that we're going to make available to all of our listeners about kind of this framework of everything that you should, as an architect, consider when you're designing outdoor spaces. And we're going to go through some major sections and hit the highlights, but we're going to provide Frank's more detailed list in the show notes for this episode. So we're going to start, like architects do, at kind of the 30,000 foot level and just talk about context and location. So let's talk about how the surrounding environment can impact outdoor space design and maybe some of the key factors that you begin with when you're doing those kinds of considerations early on in the project.
Well, usually the first thing that we look at, and it's usually covered by our client because they won't even commission us to do anything unless they did some background work, is understanding the ordinances, the local ordinances, where they're allowed, where they're not allowed, what are the conditions are critical in the planning of it, and also understanding what the health department is looking for when you do spaces like that outdoors. Those are kind of two critical things from a municipal or governmental standpoint. And then obviously it's just understanding what it is and what is there surrounding traffic, is there light conditions that have to be taken care of. During COVID, parklets were really popular. Restaurants that just had sidewalk space were allowed to use the sidewalk space for outdoor dining. But at the same time, they also had to bring in big Jersey barriers to protect from traffic on the streets. So I think those are two pretty critical elements. And then since we're talking about outdoor spaces, if we're talking about roof decks, one of the main critical conditions is understanding if you have an area on the roof to do it, what's the context there? There RTUs up there that are making sounds, kitchen exhaust, things like that. Mm-hmm. Certainly those are nothing that you want to be setting restaurant guests next to. So you have to kind of take care in understanding what those things are. And then everything else is typical architectural and planning analysis, looking at site easements, what's some building setbacks. If you're going to do some type of hard roof over an outdoor space, are you into setbacks? What are the underground sewers and things that typically, as you guys know, you have to kind of consider all that context before you start building anything. So, because sometimes these outdoor spaces aren't just patios with umbrellas. They're becoming a lot more complex.
I don't know the right time to ask this question, but I'm going to throw it in here real quick before we move on from the next section. And that's like when owners come to you guys and you start to go through kind of some of these items, what's the general response to that? Have they already done it before? They kind of know the drill, or is it really surprising to owners sometimes to see the depth at which you have to make all these considerations? What do you hear from them?
I think it's a little bit of both. Some of the clients that we have are just seasoned restaurateurs that have done everything. So they're not surprised, and sometimes they'll have suggestions that we weren't even aware of. But then sometimes when we work with independents, it's their first restaurant, and they're in the need for more seating, then it's a kind of an eye-opening experience for them on what's involved.
You had sort of mentioned that a lot of your clients come to you they've already done a lot of the homework. They've gone through zoning. They've met with their local authorities and things like that. But how many times have you had clients come to you, especially like, as you were saying, the independents, that just have no clue of what they are getting into and really looking to you as the subject matter expert to kind of get you more, basically pick your brains and say, okay, what do I do? How do I begin this?
I would say that's probably the case 75% of the time. I would say that. Usually again with the really seasoned clients, they're really on top of these things. But we've had clients that have wanted to build into setbacks with like verandas and things like that, and actually, surprisingly, they've gotten some variances to do something like that. But we're there to say, hey, you're going to have to check with the city and work with the planning department to make that happen.
And it's always that, well, why can't I?
Well, why not?
Yes.
I've seen it somewhere else, so that means I can do it too, right?
Or like another one, can't we just move that column a little bit?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of.
Oh, my gosh.
And our response is always, we can do anything.
Right.
If you want to spend the money.
Yeah, I had one client who said, well, we've got this big open lobby. Why can't we just move this column? It's a shame that column's there. Can't we move it? And then, unfortunately, I sarcastically respond to them, well, yeah, if you want your 15-story building to be one story.
Exactly. Just get out of the way.
I know. Apparently I'm not being creative enough.
Too practical.
So you talked about some of the site constraints and things like that. And you being in the Midwest, me being in the Midwest, I'm just kind of curious, like, what are the contextual cues that you find useful when you're starting a design, especially if you're looking to maybe create these outdoor spaces that are not just a single-use outdoor space or a single-season outdoor space, but something that is more of a year-round place?
Yeah, well, certainly in the planning side of it, access to the kitchen and service is going to be absolutely key. And amazingly, a lot of places in the city that have parklets or little cafes, sometimes they don't have the flexibility of having a secondary door to get into the outdoor dining space. They have to go through the front door. So they're bringing food through the host area, through outside the front doors, bringing it to the guests. But, they make it work. They've got probably 20 seats out in front of the restaurant, and they make it work. But we'll want to be very careful about that type of thing. And then I think it just really comes down to kind of understanding the vibe that they're looking for. If they're looking for a very open vibe where people see that there's outdoor dining, and then we're going to look for places around the building, if it's a freestanding building, to actually take advantage of that. We've had clients that want a private outdoor space, so it's concealed. Yeah. And so it'll be like a hidden surprise. We just finished one down in the West Loop area that is kind of a secret garden, is what they tried to make it, and it turned out really quite nice. So I think it's really kind of a vibe, and and an energy thing. And it's always it's always the cues. I think the main cues are how do we relate this outdoor space to the brand of the restaurant itself. And the project that we did downtown that recently that I mentioned, they were a very kind of Art Deco high-end interior, very dark, very deco, beautiful design. What wasn't done by us, but they asked us to do this outdoor place and they wanted it to relate. But so the challenge there is how do you relate an outdoor space to a very dark, moody Art Deco kind of supper club kind of thing. So I think it's marrying the brand to the outside that I think is another key consideration.
So can I dig into that and just ask, like, what did you do in that kind of a context? I know it's really specific to that mood and that brand, but is there any general things that you guys did that you could talk about?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we don't do very often is we do carpets outside and a lot of lounge furniture. They really went to the nth degree about making it the most comfortable outdoor patio space in the city. And I think they succeeded because it is it's just like a room out there. So, and it's covered actually 95% of it is covered with a structure, but it's also the ceiling structure. We did an acrylic roof structure. So it lets diffuse natural light in. So, I mean, it feels luxurious for being outdoor space. We even used draperies on the outside.
Nice.
So, and that's one of those kind of spaces, because it has a hard roof, we can use these shade systems and we use heaters to kind of close it down in the wintertime, which I'm sure we can get into a little bit on the MEP side. Unfortunately, in that space, we used gas heaters, which we'd like to shy away from and certainly prefer to use the electric heater. They're aesthetically much more beautiful. And there's certainly not the hazard that running gas pipes all around is.
We've used things like that in the past, and I would echo your sentiments, because one of the things that we've always had the challenge with is, okay, you're using the gas heaters, it's the smell, it's just the sound, it's things like that sort of somewhat detracts from the ambiance that you're trying to create for these high-end spaces.
Yeah, and if you're going to close it down with some vinyl shades to temper the climate, then you have to be thinking about air exchanges, fresh ventilation, CO2 detection, all of that type of stuff are hazards that you really have to be concerned about. And the other thing, and I know we'll maybe talk on MEP, but the other thing to be concerned about is condensation. When you have a roll down vinyl side to your outdoor space, there's a good chance that if you don't have good air circulation, that it's going to condensate when the dew point is just right. We had that problem actually opening up this, and we had to increase the ventilation to make it work. Yeah,
because that, Evan, goes back to that schizophrenic climate of the Midwest, especially places like Chicago, that you have sun during the day, you have wind and stuff, and then you have rain, snow, all of that stuff all at the same time, which you're now getting to experience.
I was
more
actually
of.
I went to a lunch and learn today, you guys. I was really architecting, and it was at this new outdoor eating area that there's kind of think of it as food trucks, but without the food trucks. It's like these booths almost of food service around a central eating area, and it's outdoor, it's covered, but it's open air. And I thought it was really great because this opened in the summertime, and nobody sat under that covering in the summertime. Everybody was out on the lawn in chairs and kind of what I would call open seating maybe. And now we're getting to fall weather, right? And there's these really cool kind of stool height bars everywhere with tabletop fire. They're not like fire rings. They're these fire troughs. So you get heat right where you're eating. And then there's some overhead heaters and some ceiling fans. So it's still open air. There's no walls on this structure, but it was totally comfortable. And you still feel like you're outside because you can see the views in the distance. You can feel the air moving through. So plenty of ventilation. I do wonder when the weather gets really cold, what they're going to do, because there's no option for roll down doors. Maybe they'll do the vinyl doors like you're talking about, Frank, where it's like the siding comes down and just kind of holds the heat in, keeps the weather out, but you still feel kind of like you're outdoors.
Right.
I'm just curious from like a programming standpoint, like what are the other considerations you need to make early on in planning, because there's so many different kinds of things you can do in these outdoor environments. I guess we're kind of talking about food service stuff right now, but there's other kinds of activities that could go on in these as well. But like I just mentioned, loose furniture versus fixed furniture. Like, what are the kinds of things that you're really talking to your client about when it comes to programming and planning early before you even really begin design?
Well, actually, that's a good thing to bring up furniture types, because it varies depending on the concept. We're doing stuff right now out in Massachusetts where they love booths, so they want booths outside, and so we built a long veranda where there's booths and banquettes that are stationary, that are there all year long, with very little flexible seating under cover, but there's going to be a future outdoor patio next to it that they want to have some flexible seating, because flexible seating is key in restaurant design, to be able to change party size, table sizes. So I think it runs the gamut. Furniture, I think, is a big consideration. We started talking earlier about context. A big thing that people don't think about, that clients don't think about, is headlights in cars. When you are next to some type of traffic or a parking lot, if it's a suburban pad site location, you don't want to have your guests be periodically blinded by headlights that are turning the corner or coming down a row of parking.
It's so funny. I'm like smiling so big at this huge grin, because I'm the guy who drives by and like turns my headlights off so that I don't blind the people sitting there, because whoever designed the thing didn't think about that, or they couldn't get it done. Right. And like, I'm trying to do them a favor so they have a nice experience, but nobody else does that. Nobody.
You're one in a million, Evan, for sure. Because it's not, it could be an issue. So we'll think strategically about that. Should we do some screen walls? Should there be a lattice work of plant material to help block some of that? That's one of the big things that we're concerned about.
So let me ask this, and yes, I'm falling down this rabbit hole right now, but I'm thinking about you being in Chicago and doing things downtown where you want this kind of sidewalks, cafe type environment. And there are a lot of different considerations that you have to take into play when it's essentially right next to the big mass traffic of people who are flowing back and forth, and they're either in outdoor dining, or there's passersby that are tourists or going to work and things like that. So what do you take into consideration when you're creating spaces like that?
Well, if it's in an urban environment on a city street where you might have like maybe a 12-foot wide sidewalk, or maybe a little bit wider, 15 to 18-foot deep sidewalk. I mean, obviously you have to keep the public way open. So the city is going to have some kind of criteria that you have to maintain, like 12 or 5 feet, 6 feet of sidewalk space if you're going in their sidewalk.
Right.
And then if it's an outdoor cafe, try to get some type of planting on your cafe railing, because you're going to need a cafe railing if you're serving alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it provides a little bit of a buffer from pedestrian traffic. But in the city, I mean, that's what everybody's used to, right? Everybody wants to wants to see and be seen in those kind of environments. It's a little different in the suburbs, where if we're doing a ground up building, restaurant building, or any type of hospitality building, we'll try to fit in a planting strip of like 3, 4, 5 feet wide, so that we can actually get some decent planting and provide that buffer if there's pedestrian traffic that we'd like to kind of distance ourselves from a little bit. But still, it's kind of what it's all about in these city locations is being seen and get the vibe of the street life.
It's interesting, and this is a complete aside, so bear with me here. But the last time I was in Chicago, I was walking around in not too far from your office, and there's great row of shops and restaurants and things like that. And we went to this one Greek restaurant, and the way that the sidewalk seating, and I know that we're falling down the rabbit hole of sidewalk seating and things like that, but this seating was actually, it was storefront sidewalk, and seating was closer to the road. And so you kind of passed between the sidewalks and stuff. And it was just really kind of interesting, because really you were sort of interacting, whereas like downtown, you're walking
Right.
past it. It's closer to the buildings and stuff. And this one, you're passing through the whole environment, the eating experience and everything else. And you're kind of part of the whole thing. So it was just really
I'm glad
interesting.
you brought up circulation, Cormac, because I wanted to ask about, there's so many different kinds, I would imagine, right? Based on where front of house, where back of house, where indoor, where outdoor. Is there a bar? Do you go through somewhere to get somewhere else? Like you're saying, does the public get to walk right through the middle of it? Is it
Right.
Is it you seat yourself? Is it they seat you? Like there's so many considerations of things and then I'm sure the restaurants kind of want a little bit of flexibility too, right? And so is that all? These are all different considerations that you get out on the table, as it were, up front to really work through these during the design.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we find most times the restaurant, our clients want to have people come into the lobby and greet a host and then be able to either go into the restaurant, bar, or go out to the outdoor dining area, preferably within the same space. Very rarely do we actually see them having a separate outdoor entrance, but sometimes they do. If it's large enough, if it's a large enough outdoor space and they have the labor as far as their staff is concerned, they'll put a second host outside to bring in traffic directly from outside and not kind of mess up the circulation inside the restaurant. So it all depends.
One more thing here, because you mentioned that you're doing a lot of kind of adaptive reuse. You've got a lot of old building shells that maybe you're putting a new program into, or maybe you're renovating or whatever. And I can imagine with the old building stock that you're working in Massachusetts, for example, like ADA is a huge upgrade for a lot of these places. So during the design phase, the early planning phases, even before we get to design, like that's just a given, right? We're talking about ADA accessibility for everything. That's throughout the entire building, right? It's not just the restaurant part, but it's the restrooms, it's the kitchen, it's the bar, it's all of these things.
Yes, definitely. The ADA is a prime consideration, especially with old buildings, and especially in restaurants that one of the restaurants we're working on in New Bedford right now has restrooms, and then they're sized. They have the right amount of fixtures for the current occupancy. But when you add then an outdoor space and additional seating, you have to come up with some additional restrooms. So in this particular case, we're actually doing ADA accessible restrooms outside that in the winter can be winterized, shut down when the patio's not open. But yeah, that's a prime concern because, and as far as access, change in grades, things like that, all have to be taken into account because you certainly don't want to have a special needs person have to go around the back of the restaurant or go through the service entry to access a space.
Right.
You want to give them the same experience as everybody else. So
I just had this conversation with somebody that was saying that once you create this outdoor patio or this outdoor space that is supporting the restaurant, cafe, or something like that, that you don't really need to consider that space as part of the usable space for occupancy. And I was contending, but yes, you do. And I'm now going to send this episode over to him and say, hey, let's have this conversation again.
Well, it's interesting, Cormac. I would say maybe 15 years ago, some municipalities didn't catch on that should be an issue. And so it wasn't a problem. But I cannot think in the last 10 years, any jurisdiction that we've been in where they say, oh, it doesn't matter how many extra seats you add. You have to provide the right ratio.
So let me ask you a little bit more, since we've sort of talking about the infrastructure of adding extra bathrooms and stuff. What are some of the other considerations infrastructure wise that you need to consider when you're doing that kind of support of outdoor design?
Well, I think one of the things I probably didn't stress enough was access to the kitchen and service. That's really, really important, mainly because not only for bringing out a product to your guests that is warm, still hot, right out of the kitchen kind of thing, but that servers don't have an kind of obstacle course to get to the guest that's sitting outside. So if you can plan it so that you have almost direct, and if we're doing a ground up building, we'll want to have direct access to the patio from the kitchen. But then also having to make sure they have the proper amount of service stations outside to service bussing of tables, to get dishes if they're doing plates and silverware, to get dishes out and back into the dishwasher in the kitchen. That's going to be a key consideration from a context standpoint. And I think basically the other thing that comes to mind is prevailing winds and sun direction. If you have a west facing place, and this is like with any building, obviously, you want to have some shade devices if possible. If you're doing a hard cover or a veranda type of structure, to make sure that that's not going to be an issue, because that's like prime restaurant time is as the sun's setting, and people aren't going to want to sit there if they're blinded by the sun. So, and then prevailing winds I think is the other thing. Depending on where you're at, what is the wind conditions going to be like on any given day, to where that might be a problem. And then definitely we will never like do a pendant light hanging on a chain on the outdoors, because it's just going to swing back and forth.
Turns into a wrecking ball.
Right.
Yeah. So it's going to be like a rigid stem light fixture that we're very confident in is not going to move when they get like a 20-mile-an-hour gust or something like that.
It seems to me like these outdoor spaces too, like you don't want it to feel like an afterthought, right? Like a lot of times they might feel like they're kind of tacked on, and I think there's a lesser priority on some of these spaces depending on the owner, because they don't use it all year round, for example, or whatever. But I'm curious from like a budgeting standpoint, but also from an infrastructure, MEP, structural standpoint, it seems to me like these spaces don't cost that much less than interior spaces. You still have to do a lot of design work to get these to be really special places outside. You've got to have heat, you've got to have wind protection, you've got to think about the acoustics, you've still got to design and pay for all of this stuff. But they also get to use it a lot more by doing that. I'm curious like what your experience is with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's spot on. All those things are going to be considerations. And actually from a sound standpoint, we actually sometimes have more concerns about the sound that the outdoor space is generating versus receiving because of neighbors. If you're in an urban environment, you don't want angry neighbors. And so that's got to be a key consideration from a sound standpoint as well. So, I mean, temperature, climate control, like you said, Evan, it all depends on how often and how much during the year you want to use it. If you have a nice winter in Chicago, it's possible we can have clients that can use it almost year round. It's rare though. And what we'll do to seasonalize it is, and we're doing a lot more of this now, is using, like I mentioned, these shade systems on tracks. And then we can do like double shade systems where you can not only have a vinyl that'll come down to do the temperature break and the wind break, but then you can have an additional shade behind it to help with the sun and light control. So that's I think another thing. But like you said, now you're building a hard roof. You've got some motorized shades. You've got an electric heating system. Yeah, it adds up. It doesn't. It's not cheap if you do it if you want something year round or almost 3 seasons.
Yeah. So let me ask you. You said you're starting to talk about kind of like some of these physical elements within the outdoor space that are more. Sometimes people just think, oh, outdoor space, we have a nice little flat patio, we're going to get ourselves an umbrella and some chairs and stuff, and we're going to call it done. But you're talking about like a room, you're creating a space, you're creating this place. And so sometimes like, what are the considerations like for budgetary concerns? And I think Evan kind of alluded to like this kind of the structural concerns and things like that. I mean, and do clients, when they're thinking about those spaces, how do they factor some of that in? Because they may be thinking preconceived notion of one thing. And when you show them, oh, and that's this, and they're like, oh, well, what's the budget? Like,
double. That's one of the first questions. And then, and usually the response is, we don't know how much is it going to cost. So then we end up doing some schematic drawings and working with either a company that does budgets or work with a GC kind of on a maximum upset kind of negotiated type contract to help with that. But yeah, I mean, the big thing structurally that's a concern is if you do roof decks, obviously. You're putting in a live load on a roof with a deck, the weight of a deck, all that type of stuff. That has to be understood first. So one of the first things we'll do is we'll bring in a structural engineer have him help us with the feasibility of such a project if it's a roof deck. If it's an on-grade structure like a veranda structure, then it's really a little bit more straightforward. But with utilities running around outside, you have to be careful of where your foundations are. You might have an 8x8 post that's holding up part of your veranda, but the footing is going to be like probably 4 feet by 4 feet. And how close is it to the main municipal gas line and the sewer line and all that kind of stuff? So structurally, it's more underground that are concerns in that case.
I want to ask you about kind of product durability and performance, because you're exposing this stuff to the elements a lot more potentially. But also I want to combine that with aesthetics, because the way you're talking about shades, you're talking about motorized shades, we're talking about electric heaters, we're talking about all kinds of things that to me have now gotten to the point where they're integrated into other assemblies. They're integrated into a soffit. They're integrated into a veranda. We've got technology controlling multiple things. And I feel like performance and durability and aesthetics are kind of all coming together in a really interesting way. Whereas before they would roll a heater out, right? And they would bolt up a fan,
right,
and they would zip tie some shades up, right? Like that's how it used to be when it was just like, let's make an outdoor space. And now it's like, it's outdoor architecture. It is a very spatial thing, and people are concerned about how these look, but also how they perform over an extended period of time. Like take us kind of through some of that side of it, because performance, I can imagine from an owner's point of view, like the stuff needs to last. And at the same time, people want to feel like they're in a really nice environment and things aren't just tacked on and bolted on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned recessing things. I mean, the heating systems right now, there are electric heat systems out there that you can recess in a soffit that it look very clean in there for outdoor spaces. I think your selection of fabrics, obviously you want some fabrics that are made for outdoor use. If they're going to get sun, and they're color fast, hold up well. A lot of it, I mean, obviously you're not going to do casework outside that is going to be exposed to rain and warping and things like that you wouldn't have an issue with on the inside. But there's a number of different things that you can do with sealers using lumber, two by materials that are solid that you could get a nice seal on. That can be used outside, and they'll eventually get some wear, but they'll last a lot longer than thinking that you can just pull in like an indoor chair, like furniture, for example. I mean, definitely you're going to be needing some outdoor furniture. But no matter how many times that you think about all the things, the durability of furniture and fixtures, there's always a surprise. And we actually had one a few years ago in Denver. It was amazing. We had these tables that we had out in their outdoor cafe. And they were a composite wood material, very durable table. That was an outdoor table. We've used it before, never had any problems. Clients loved it. Well, what was happening with this client, and I don't know if it had to do with the altitude in Denver or what, they were using in their wine glasses, when they put their wine glass on the surface, they were noticing that after a while, they'd move the glass and there was like a little melted circle on the composite wood. And what was happening, what we kind of figured out was happening was the sun was doing like the magnifying glass phenomena.
Oh my gosh.
And it was focusing this hot little beam of light down the stem on the actual stand of the glass and starting to melt the wood. So so they had to go with a different type of glass, and the problem solved, but it was like, who would have ever thought of that?
Never saw that coming.
All the factors that you go through to try to make these outdoor durable spaces, and you fall victim to a piece of stemware.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly. And the client was really taken that was the problem. And from what I understand, once they made the glassware change, problem solved.
Nice. What do your clients do when they don't have a four-season setup with all of the stuff that they have out there? Like, do they have to provide off-site storage? Or, I mean, I can't imagine it looks good to just leave it out and say you can't sit there kind of a thing, right? So it's like you have to think through kind of operationally, but then like aesthetically as well when you're planning this stuff in advance.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I mean, most cases, if it's a fairly large project, it doesn't become in the way. They'll keep it out year round. They will have some offsite storage. Sometimes when we do ground up buildings with outdoor spaces, we'll provide them space for storage, but obviously space is expensive to build, so they might find it more economical to bring it off site. The other thing that's related to that, Evan, is the positioning of it. When we do freestanding hospitality spaces, we try not to have you go through a front or outdoor space to get into the restaurant. Because in the bad weather, you're going through kind of an empty space. And if they take their furniture off site, or if it's on site, then you're going through a space with 20 tables that are empty and snow on them to get into the restaurant. So you want to position it, if you can, in a way that's not a problem. But yeah, offsite storage is certainly something we see a lot.
So it's just another thing that owners might have to think about and maybe didn't see that coming, kind of an expense, something on a line item on the expense sheet, right? It's like, we got to store this stuff because we don't want to set the expectation that you can sit there, or that, like you said, you don't want people walking through a space of, a bunch of tables covered in snow.
So is that a conversation that you have with them during the planning process? Definitely. Because if you say, hey, we're only able to create a 3-season space for you, but you have to consider that 4th season and what you do with those spaces.
Yes, with all those furnishings,
Yeah, I was just going to expand on that a little bit. You talked about different types of operations. I think the other component that we see becoming more popular with outdoor spaces is putting bars out there. And we've even seen instances where they want to do cooking outside. And that's where, for one, from an MEP standpoint, obviously plumbing, drains, things like that for bars, you need that's going to be there's going to be some costs there to do that, because you need water, you need floor drains and so forth. But I think the other aspect is the health department issues. With restaurants, you obviously, if you're preparing food or you have food open in a service kind of environment, you need to have cleanable surfaces around, especially the ceiling. So we actually did a project at the Star down in Dallas in the Dallas Cowboys kind of world down there. And they actually made us do a cleanable roof over this outdoor grill station. We ended up doing it in stainless. It ended up being beautiful. From what I understand, they don't use it too much anymore out there because of the operation headache for it. But bars and outdoor cooking are something to really be careful of. And then also, if you're going to do a bar and you're going to spend the money on all of the MEP work or the plumbing work that's necessary to build that bar, it better have more than 5 seats, or else it's not going to be worth it. It should probably have at least 10, preferably 15 or 20 seats to actually make it worth the investment.
Honestly, I was going to ask that question. It's like, now you're investing so much in the infrastructure of this outdoor kitchen or the outdoor bars you're talking about. And if you're also limited to the amount of time that you can use it throughout the year, I mean, that's got to be that similar conversation that you have to have with them. Is like, what do you do with this space? How do you close it down? How does it become something that it's not like this eyesore during the off periods of times when you're not using, when you're trying to create this, again, this kind of like this atmosphere, this ambiance of like, not only this continuation of your interior space to your exterior space, but just the practicality of having all of that stuff in there. That's kind of interesting. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's something to consider with the outdoor bar spaces. I mean, that's kind of key. And a lot of people wouldn't even think, okay, well, you have to be concerned from a health department standpoint for bars. I mean, but you forget, well, there's garnishes, right? You have cherries, you have limes, you have, even if you're not serving food out in the bar, you have cocktail garnishes that have to be in covered containers, that type of thing. So those are all little details that have to be thought out and made and definitely considered by the operator before they run with that. And the health department, I mean, if we're doing our job, we would already have had conversations with the health department before before any construction begins, and certainly before we get too far into our design work, because we want to understand what that particular health department feels is important. They're going to have their own codes to follow, but sometimes they'll go off code and they have like particular concerns that they had with a restaurant down the street a year ago, that type of thing that we have to look out for. So if we do our homework properly, we can usually address all those things.
It's interesting because so that's the doing that proper homework is all part of the things that aren't seen. They're the background when you're trying to create this overall atmosphere outside and what it is that you're trying to create. And so I don't know if people appreciate like the work that it takes to think of all of those small things, those small details, those small design elements that really kind of contribute to the atmosphere that otherwise you're just there having a nice time out, drinking some wine and enjoying the outdoor space. But then the elements that create
it's like
spaces.
Disneyland, right? You don't want to know what's actually behind.
Yeah, you don't want to know how the sausage is made.
Exactly.
You just want to eat it. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. I mean, and if you do your job well, people shouldn't notice that stuff. I mean, it should be seamless. They should be focused on having a good time, enjoying some great drinks and great beverages, and being served well by a attendant server and a great chef. And that should be what stands out to them. That should be the experience.
But let's just say it here because we're all architects. It's like that mask that exists, that facade of magic, and this is just a magic experience that I'm having, and all of the work that Cormac and you have described that's going on in the background, and that value not coming through as like, this is what the architect, like that's part of the issue with their value being misunderstood, right? Is because it very much is just like this great experience. It's always great, right? But we're talking about great, we're idealizing the situation. And it's like, there is so much that goes on behind the scenes to make this thing work that we got to get better at that somehow.
Yeah. People, I think, don't understand that to some extent, but that's the life we live, right? So you just got to deal with it. And I mean, you guys know the reward is actually watching people use the space.
I think you said it earlier. It's not the pat on the back that you're looking for. It's how are people using your space? Is your space successful? I mean, it's those things. It's those elements. It's just like, I did a good job. So you can do your own little pat on the back because
exactly.
You've talked about kind of this experience and ambiance and brand, and maybe we can wrap this up just kind of talking about that, like the feeling people have, and like what are the elements that go into the feeling that people have in the space, and how it's tied back to the brand, and how it's tied into all of these. They're at some level they're kind of psychological, experiential, but this is really kind of what ultimately you want to play out, the experience that you want people to have in these spaces. Can you talk about the elements that you guys are really thinking about that go into that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the very important things we haven't covered from an MEP standpoint is lighting. We talked a little bit about context. Well, you want to make sure that if there's a street light screaming 110-foot candles of light, you want to figure out how to deal with that. So lighting is going to be key. And it has to marry well with their brand. I mean, some concepts are high energy, a vibe with a little bit louder music. That's one space. Then there's other concepts that are just a little bit sexier, a little bit more intimate. That you want to do softer music. You want to do dimmable lighting to change with the time of day. Those are the types of things that I think you want to look at. And then it's really surfaces and furniture. I mean, what kind of surfaces, what textures and surfaces are you going to be looking at that marry well with the interior vibe, the brand that they're doing? Are they doing rough sawn rustic wood on the inside? Is that the kind of place? Well, then it's okay to do that outside. But if they're looking at, if they have like sleek finishes and things on the inside, you have to approach it differently for the outside space. Metals, what metals are you using? Is brass like a key brand element for the inside? Well, how can we use brass on the outside in a creative way? Obviously in a restrictive way if there's a budget concern, but finishes, I think that's important. And in fabrics. There's so many different things, as you guys know, there's so many different products out there that just by their characteristics, whether it's their pattern or their color, you can find a tie-in to something that's happening inside. So I think lighting and color and finish and texture, I think are important things, as well as paving. We're not pouring concrete slabs for patios too much anymore. We're using permeable pavers, or we're doing pavers that are sloped properly to landscape areas so you don't have water issues, that type of thing. Or be much more, especially in mixed use projects, of thinking about how water is processed through the site, and understanding, okay, if you have a roof, you're going to have to drain that roof somewhere. Is it going to go into the municipal sewer system, or is it going to have to be splashed out on grade somewhere? How is that happening? But you can do it nicely with a nice paver versus pouring a big slab of concrete and maybe throwing some integral color. Now, we've done that before, but it's not, it's definitely moving away. I think with a lot of the environmental concerns that we're seeing, that's changing. And we're starting to be smarter about the type of paving and how things are being drained and things like that on the site. Mm-hmm. And they can add to the ambiance for sure.
I think about like water elements and fire elements and texture and light, like you talked about, and like the color temperature of the light. And there's so many layers to successful design. And I personally love it when it's tied into all of the different places that you experience in a hospitality setting, like all the way back to the bathroom, right? It's like, what are the dividers between the urinals? What's the sink hardware, and how does it work with what's going on in the restaurant and then the outdoor seating area? When there's like that level of thought that kind of goes into tying all of this together to really make it on brand, right? Like that's where you're kind of going back to this layer of stuff that just, it's like in The Big Lebowski, that rug really ties the room together, right? It's just this layer of stuff, and some of it's ambient, some of it's hardware, some of it's seating, some of it's environmental, some of it's acoustics, but all of that is working together in concert to create a great experience for people. And maybe it's just because I'm an architect, right? But it's like, I appreciate that so much when you can see the level of thoughtfulness that kind of ties all of this stuff together.
Yeah, especially the details. I mean, it was in a hotel in Milwaukee about a year and a half ago that we go to on a regular basis. And even the coat hangers in the rooms are these kind of cast iron elements that actually pick up the brand of their logo. And it's just little details like that even non-architects have a chance. When they see it, it's like, oh, that's cool. I mean,
that is awesome.
It is. It's about tying the experience in. It's about making that progression of spaces as you come in to the front door. Right. You're at an entry point. What are you seeing the whole place? Do you get an understanding of the space? And then when you move back and forth from the outdoor space to the restrooms or to the indoor bar, I mean, what is the customer's experience? They're not having to go down like an empty hall, or you want it to make it understandable and make it all a part of the experience, from lighting to finishes, textures, movement through the space. It's all things that you have to be thinking about.
I live in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of trees and stuff here. And I just want, because you're talking about urban areas, and I don't want to miss, you talked about kind of buffers, right, between heavily trafficked areas and maybe an outdoor eating area. But something that I've experienced, Cormac, like it was in Chicago, like the Apple Store, right? They've got trees in the Apple Store, right on the river, on the Chicago River. And it's really incredible. And I'm just curious, from the hospitality side of things with outdoor spaces, are you really pulling the landscape into those spaces too? Are you finding that more often? Are owners asking for that kind of a thing because of the kind of ambiance that it creates?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if there's anything that you can do to kind of bring that landscape closer to the dining experience, I think people get into that because they feel more nestled into nature. Obviously, there's projects where you're looking over nature on a hilltop or something like that, which is wonderful. But I think a lot of people do want to have nature pulled into their experience when they do things. The interesting thing about that, whether it's trees, open verandas, trellises, things like that, is you have to think of a couple of things from a planting material standpoint, and that's one, bees and plants that attract bees. And birds. So if you're going to do an open veranda or a trellis type of structure for shade, you got to feel pretty comfortable you're not in an area where there's going to be a lot of birds migrating and perching up on top of there and doing their business right on your on your fettuccine Alfredo. So you have to be really careful. We've learned through the years that, and landscape architects are really great with this. They'll specify plant material that they know is not going to flower, doesn't necessarily bear fruit, because you don't want to necessarily attract that type of stuff.
I would even think just with like environmental sensitivities that people have, allergies and things like that, that you would have to worry about pollinating plants. And so, again, you would really rely on a landscape architect to be really savvy with plant selection. Well, Frank, this has been a great conversation, and it gives hopefully everybody in the audience a lot to think about, because it isn't maybe as easy as it appears on the surface. I mean, that's the magic of architecture, right? Is that on the surface, it looks magical. And then behind the scenes, so much has gone on to create these spaces. So thanks so much for sharing this. And like I said in the beginning, we'll share the entire kind of list of all of the things that are, it's not really a checklist, but it's just like topical. And these are the things that key considerations that should be thought of throughout that process. So thanks for doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a blast talking with you guys. Definitely enjoyable.